If you are a regular listener to the Sociology Show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for The Sociology Show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes and keep enjoying the show.
Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and in each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research and their experiences. So put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2U, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit tutor2u.net/sociology, and there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so my guest for this episode is Dr. Laura Bentley. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm a working class academic, originally from Barnsley. At the moment, I'm working at the University of Birmingham in the Sociology, Social Policy and Criminology department. I work as a research fellow there, but I've recently picked up some teaching, which I'm absolutely loving. So that's where I'm working at the minute. Originally from Barnsley. Sorry, I'm not sure I talk for longer about myself.
No, that's all. I was going to say, despite moving around the country, delighted to hear you still got your Barnsley accent, though, Laura.
Yeah. It's my accent's something which is really important to me. And when I started my PhD, it was something I got quite anxious about because, typically you don't tend to hear, a Barnsley accent in academia. And I was quite anxious about me sort of fitting in. But I was equally anxious about losing the accent because I love it. It's very much tied to who I am. But yeah, thankfully it's not gone anywhere.
Of all the Yorkshire accents, Barnsley's probably one of the stronger ones, isn't it?
Oh God! Oh yeah. It's broad. But actually, there'd be quite a few people in Barnsley who would say that I sound quite posh now, and that's it's quite. I think it depends on who you speak to. Some people think I sound, incredibly broad, but then at home they think, what sort of posh area of Yorkshire are you from?
You've gone soft.
Yeah, gone soft.
So, Laura, how did you get into sociology? When did you first study it?
Well, I sort of fell into it in some way. I had always been interested in social science, and I think it's only in hindsight that I can say that now. But when I was studying geography and things like psychology, there were various things which I really loved. So, the research elements within psychology and, studying about poverty and, the indices of multiple deprivation in geography. So I've always been interested in social sciences, but really until I went to university, I'd never heard of sociology, which seems a bit silly to me now, but I'd just never heard of it. I don't even know if it was offered as a course at Barnsley College when I was there, I'm not sure. But yeah, I went to Sheffield Hallam and studied English and education studies because all I wanted to do was teach. I either wanted to be a hairdresser or a teacher. So yeah, sort of fell in love with sociology at uni. The education part of my degree was very much looking at, the history of education, social policy in education, and the sociology of education as well. And I focused on social class inequalities in education for my dissertation, and just absolutely fell in love with sociology from that point, and doing research into class inequalities. So I sort of fell into it, and I've said that before, and it's annoyed other academics because there can be people who are quite protective of sociology, and they probably don't think that people should fall into it. But yeah, that was my sort of journey to sociology, and I'm very much still in love with it now, today.
And you said kind of your area of focus, social class and inequalities. Who are your inspirations? Who are you reading?
So in terms of my academic inspirations, so Pierre Bourdieu is my sort of...
is your god.
He's my god. He's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. And I think, I've spoke to a lot of other working class academics who engage with his work, and when you read it as a working class person, you just have an affinity with his work, and he's quite it can be quite wordy, and it can be quite difficult to get through what he's saying sometimes, as it is with a lot of different theorists. But you just have an affinity for what he writes about. So yeah, absolutely love his work, and also the work of Diane Ray and Lisa Mackenzie, both absolutely fantastic working class academics from working class backgrounds doing work and researching the lives of working class people in education and more widely. And to be honest, the reason why I sort of find them so inspirational is they sort of do the work from a social justice perspective, and they bring that approach with them. And I think that's the way that we should be doing sociology, and the way we should be doing research into class inequalities. We should be doing it from a perspective of, establishing what's going on and unpicking the reproduction of various social inequalities, but we should also be bringing a social justice perspective to try and figure out what can we actually do to create a more just society and have a positive impact on our community. So Diane Ray, Lisa Mackenzie, and I'd say Teresa Crew as well, who I think, I'm not sure if you've... I've
interviewed her very recently. Her episode will be available.
She's an inspiration to me. Her work on working class academics and what it is to navigate the academy as a working class person is, it was such a privilege to read the first draft of a book, which is due out next month. Her work is absolutely brilliant, and it's not just her academic work that I find so important, it's her approach. So she works in social policy, so and in policy we're not just trying to establish what's going on, we're trying to figure out reasons, we're trying to figure out ways through which we can make things better for people and have a more positive impact on society. So absolutely love her work.
Great, thanks for plugging those for me, Laura. I'm just going to say to listeners, you can go back and listen to Lisa's episode, Lisa Mackenzie, Teresa Crew, and Diane Ray, and they're all really, really popular episodes as well, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's get into your own work. Tell us about your own research.
So I completed my PhD research late last year, and I was looking into the experiences of working class women who, go to university and graduate in today's day and age. And I worked on a research project at the same time called the Paired Peers Research Project, which was based at the two universities in Bristol. And the project the aim of the project was to figure out whether higher education experiences are classed in some way, So the group of students who were both middle class and working class, who attended University of the West of England and the University of Bristol, and spoke to them over the 3 years to see whether their experiences of being at university, studying at university, were classed in some way. And I started my PhD just as these young people had graduated into the labour market. And I was very fortunate enough to look at a group of the students who'd taken part in the Paired Peers Research Project. And the group that I chose to focus on were the working class women. And so I was really interested to find out whether their experiences of, graduating from university and moving back home and trying to find work and establish relationships and have a career, whether these were classed and gendered in some way. And I found that they were. And I was really interested in hearing about their experiences of social mobility, whether that was upward social mobility or downward. So yeah, that was the aims of the research.
And then how are you actually collecting your data? What kind of methodology did you use?
So I interviewed 15 working class women, and I used semi-structured interviews, which for me, I mean, it's always been my go-to method of collecting qualitative data, because it just gives you that sort of flexibility. With a semi-structured interview, you'll have, a set number of questions which you can deviate from if you need and want to, but then there's a structure to always come back to. So I've been talking to some of these women for an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes, and there'd be times when we've spent 20 minutes away from the planned interview schedule, but actually sometimes those places where we went might have even been more interesting than the questions that I had in front of me. So it's important. It just is important for me to have that flexibility when I'm with participants, and it allows them as well to have some level of control and input into the process. And again, it's sort of, just because you go into the research having maybe some idea of how it's going to come out, that's not necessarily always the case, and you need to allow for some flexibility, because you never know what people are going to bring to the table. Yeah,
exactly. And you want to delve a little bit deeper into that, surely.
Yeah,
that's great. And I suppose it's really important to build a rapport with the person that you're interviewing as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if I'd have chosen quite rigid, structured interviews, then there's less chance for that. There's less chance to build up that rapport. And if you're working with people over a long-term basis, I interviewed these women for 3.5 years on quite a regular basis. So when you're doing that, you want to build up some rapport with them. And a semi-structured interview schedule will help you. It'll help you do that.
Thank you, Laura. That's going to be the end of part 1. And in part 2, we're going to talk more about your findings from the research.
Great, thank you.
Hi, welcome back to part 2 of the Sociology Show. I'm talking to Dr. Laura Bentley about her work. You interviewed 15 working class women. Tell us about that. So what were your kind of overall findings? What were your main findings from interviewing the women?
So there were many, really. I think one important thing that came out of it was that we look at, a sort of working class category, and the way that some sociologists talk about working class people is as if we're some sort of homogenous group, and it's really not the case. So within my research, I've identified these different types of different groups of working class people. So I had 11 firmly working class people and 4 upper working class women, and it's, I think, really important to look at categories and question categories within sociology, so that we're not talking about people as, homogenous groups. There's much sort of, there's a lot of differences between working class people. So I hope that my research has helped, just question that. So I found that the upper working class women were a lot more likely to engage in sort of traditional postgraduate study, go on to do masters, and they were more likely to have developed these sort of soft skills through engaging in internships and extracurricular activities, and to go travelling while they were at university. And all of these soft skills provided a sought-after cultural capital, which graduate employers, really look for these days. So I found the upper working class women were more likely to have been able to have the time and the resources to develop this capital. And this was a stark difference to the firmly working class women who, when they were at university, they had to spend a lot of time working. They couldn't just be there to, enjoy their education, to take part in their education. They had to work in order to live. They had to pay rent. Student Finance England didn't, give them enough funds to pay the rent and, be able to enjoy university life. They had to work in, retail and as waitresses and barmaids. So this just meant that there was a lot more anxiety in their narratives around money, and they were less likely to be able to engage in, unpaid internships, for instance. And there was a lot of worry around finances for after university. Once Student Finance England stops paying them they've received grants and their funding. A lot of them were very anxious about the next steps, about having to return home and find work. And unfortunately, one of the graduates experienced homelessness for 2 years. And it just, these are narratives which you don't tend to hear when, we talk about graduates. When we talk about graduates, we tend to think of, middle-class graduates in graduate employment and in professional wages. But there's a flip side to this conversation where there's a lot of working class graduates who are experiencing a lot of emotional distress after graduation, and there's a lot of them struggling to even access welfare and universal credit, and having to go to the job centre and retrain, and there's just a lot of struggle out there amongst working class graduates that you don't tend to hear about.
No, I was going to ask you about that. Is there quite a high dropout rate?
There's a higher dropout rate for working class students than the middle class students, yes, and that tends to happen, I believe, in the first year and most of the first semester as well. And I think I'd sort of put that down to, based on my reading and my research, I'd put that down to this. You sort of feel like a fish out of water as a working class student in higher education, whether you're at an elite Russell Group university, or whether you're at a post 92, there's you still have this sort of feeling and this sense of not belonging and not fitting in, and you feel as though you have to shed a certain part of yourself in order to fit in there and assimilate and do well in your degree. So I think there's a lot that goes on for working class students in university that it's not generally spoken about. We push for widening participation, which is fantastic. We want more working class students in university, of course, but widening participation, is fantastic. But we need to talk about what happens to them when they get to university and how they navigate university and prepare for leaving as well, and what happens once they've left. It's all well and good getting them in and having them pay these extortionate fees, but what about their experiences? These are important as well.
It's interesting you're kind of describing that idea of like habitus, isn't it, where you feel comfortable, where you feel it feels like your natural environment. I can totally understand that. For many working class students, it just doesn't sit right, doesn't feel comfortable, even the language and so on as well.
Yeah, and that's something that that's all something that really gets under my skin, and it's something in my own practice as a lecturer that I try and just not be this typical academic who walks in the room, uses all these large words and walks out. It can be a really intimidating experience, university, for working class students, and academics more generally could do a lot better to come across as normal people, not just because sometimes the language, it can be so exclusionary, and it leaves them sitting there thinking, God, I'm thick, I don't deserve to be here, and it's such a horrible thing, and that's something I work against in my own teaching.
It really brings to mind, I remember being in a lesson where the topic was teaching and learning, and the lecturer, who's incredibly erudite, well spoken, spent half an hour on what the word "and" meant. Yeah, because he was saying, do we mean teaching and learning, they're together, or are they two separate things, teaching and learning something? So, honestly, it was half an hour on what the word "and" meant. And
well, that sounds to me...
Wow.
That sounds to me like that lecturer was not prepared for that lecture, and they were waffling on. But of course, when you sat there, and listening to people sort of wax on lyrically about various theories, it can be so exclusionary. And it's not just the things that we teach which can be exclusionary. It's the sort of the symbolic violence can come into the way that we're just talking more generally with one another. One of the participants in my PhD, she said her lecturer came in one of the first weeks and said, or it was after the summer holiday, and they went, "Oh, so did everyone enjoy the holidays abroad? Who went skiing where?" And she said, "I've never been on a plane in my life," but she wouldn't, she said, she didn't talk in lectures anyway. And it's probably because of, things like that, because there's just generally an expectation, especially at Russell Group universities, that people just have this very middle class cultural capital, that we've been to a certain type of school, or that we holiday in a certain area of the world and go skiing down, etc.
It's interesting. I mean, when I went to university, my mother and father didn't go to university, nor did my older sister, so I was kind of the first. And I remember getting towards the end of my degree, and one of my lecturers asking me, would I be interested in going on to do a master's or a PhD? And I had to admit, I don't actually know what that meant. I didn't know what a master's was. I didn't know what PhD stood for, because that hadn't kind of been part of my world, really.
Yeah, and I share that experience with you. And I was thinking today about this. When I finished my degree, well, I was coming towards the end. My academic tutor said to me, "There's this PhD funding that's come up. Would you think about applying for it?" I had no idea what a PhD was. I had no idea about postgraduate study. All I knew is that if I was going to be a teacher, I had to do a PGC. That's all I knew. And I remember thinking, oh no, like I just want to be a teacher. And I said no, and she said, think about it. And I didn't know what a PhD was because I'd not grown up with that knowledge.
A doctor was someone that you went to go to see when you didn't feel well.
Yes.
Yeah. But that was to me as well. That's what a doctor meant. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And I've had, and that joke is still like told in my family, like, you know, oh yeah, we're gonna go to Dr Laura to sort his toes out or whatever.
Yeah. What were the other kind of real experiences for a lot of working class students? Was there anything else like that they felt kind of a fish out of water?
Yeah, so I think in terms of making friends with their peers who they studied alongside of, they tended to, the students at Russell Group University struggled to make friends with the people on their courses because, you know, they might not necessarily have had the same experiences as one another. And then, say, on the weekend, the working class students, you know, they needed to be out working in order to pay for rent and bills and things. So there were times when, you know, they'd see other students who didn't have to work, so they'd be able to socialise with one another through various groups or sporting activities because they had the time on the weekend to do that. Whereas some of the working class students tended not to have that time, unfortunately. So yeah, so quite a few struggled to make friends with people on their course.
Yeah, and I remember that. It's coming back to me. When I was at university, everyone used to go to the student union on a Friday night, which I did go to, but I worked at a co-op on Saturday and Sunday morning. So that was normally done with a hangover, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I was the same. When I was a student at Sheffield Hallam, I worked every weekend. I was working Friday, Saturday and Sunday. I used to work in this restaurant. There's no time, like, you know, my housemates who actually, just talking now, there's so many parallels between my experiences and the women that I've interviewed, because I really struggled to get along with a lot of my peers that I went to uni with and that I lived with as well. It were only in my third year that I found my girls, so to speak, and there were three working class women like myself. Yeah, so I think you do, don't you? You sort of gravitate towards people who you share similar experiences with, and you have similar sort of capital as one another.
Yeah, but I think that's really interesting in terms of class, particularly to do with money, that the more responsibilities you have or the more money you need to earn, you often become more and more disconnected from the university life because, as you said, if you're a university and you didn't have to do a part-time job and you didn't have any other worries, you'd throw yourself into it, be down the student union every night, making friends and so on. But that's kind of a part of class, isn't it? The responsibilities that come with it.
Yeah, and that's, you know, thinking about the reasons why these women went to uni in the first place. You know, their aim was very much they wanted to be in a position once they'd finished uni with their degrees to be able to find secure and better paid work, which they found rewarding, and they really stressed this idea of they wanted and needed financial independence. Some of them had accessed the welfare system before going to university, so they knew what it was to live with that stigma and experience the symbolic violence of having to rely on the state in that way, and they wanted to avoid that at all costs. So yes, they went to uni with this idea of I want to be financially independent. I want to be able to, be in a position where I only rely on myself. And they were also very keen to be able to, in their words, pay back their parents, which I think is a very working class thing. They'd seen their parents struggle, working hour after hour on a low wage, insecure employment contract, struggling to find sort of suitable housing that was big enough, and they'd really seen their parents work so incredibly hard. So they went to uni with the intention to pay them back, which I think is a very working class thing.
And can I ask, maybe this could be a final question, Laura, do you worry about the current situation in terms of working class students, in the world we're living in at the moment? Are we going to see less and less working class students go to university?
Yeah, I do worry in a few senses. Even since the increase in fees, we haven't seen the number of working class students drop, which Labour thought that was going to be the case. We'd have less sort of disadvantaged students going to university, but that wasn't the case. It's increased, and I think it's because, the pressure of having to find work at the minute, and things have changed in the way of finding a well-paid job. It's there's this idea that you need to have a degree in order to do that. So I don't think we're going to see less working class students at university, which is worrying because the state of higher education is very dismal right now, especially for working class students. I am concerned about the current situation because with students being told to stay at the term time address during COVID and not to go home right now, there's a lot of students who will be locked into halls in small cramped rooms, and they won't be able to get out to go to work, and work pays for bills and housing, which, as I spoke about earlier, in order to pay your rent, a lot of working class students need to find employment. And no one's hiring at the minute, and retail and leisure sectors are closing. So I am quite concerned about the fact that there'll be a lot of working class students right now in halls, locked in, struggling financially and emotionally, and that is a big concern for me, and especially seeing as the grants have been scrapped for undergraduate students, and now I know that it was replaced with an increase in the amount of loan that they could take out, but all that does is saddle working class students with more debt, which is going to be hanging over them, for years to come. So I am really I don't think we're going to see a drop in the number of working class students at university, because what else are they going to do? There's very few jobs out there at the minute. And I don't, depressingly, I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I think they'll continue to go to university, but university, the higher education sector at the minute is in a quite a bad state, especially for students from working class backgrounds.
I just wonder if more students might go to their local university and stay living at home, which financially is beneficial, but it's not really what university's about, is it?
Well, I think typically that's what people think. We have this idea that the university experience has to consist of sort of
getting drunk,
going out, getting drunk, and of course, there's a lot of students who don't move away from home, who commute, which of course at the minute commuting on packed transport is not conducive to good health at the moment. So I think more will stay at home, but we're in a very strange time at the moment, and I feel like we're on a bit of a roller coaster in the higher education sector. Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. I want to try and end on a positive.
I know. Sorry.
I was just trying to think of a positive to end on. But, the fact that you're saying that numbers are not dropping, even since the introduction of the fees, that's a real positive, isn't it? That the numbers of working class students is much bigger than it ever was before.
Yeah. And that is good. And, the sector has opened up more for working class people, and fortunately I'm seeing a lot more working class people in postgraduate study as well, and doing PhDs, and I think the more that can be the case, the more working class academics we can have working in the sector. I think that can only improve how the sector is run. So I think it'll definitely help increase diversity in the sector.
There you go. We did get a positive at the end. Come on.
I know. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Could I just ask you, Laura, to let the listeners know where they can find out more about your work, or they can follow you on Twitter as well, I assume?
Yeah, so my Twitter account is Laura Bentley, PhD, and you can always give me a quick Google and you'll find me on I've got a University of Birmingham webpage and my email's on there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Laura. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
If you are a regular listener to the Sociology Show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for The Sociology Show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes and keep enjoying the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email thesociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.